In my previous videos, I've just been sharing about academic life and how you can study abroad, particularly from a Hong Kong perspective. But today I thought, let me come and just talk generally about life in Hong Kong, society where people are only here for a short period and then they're going back to their countries. I don't know why it's set up that way. A lot of people don't really stay here long term, right? A lot of people use Hong Kong as a stepping stone to somewhere else. Make sure you watch this video before you decide to move to Hong Kong, because some of the cons might make you think twice. In this channel, I discuss all things to do with building and growing your academic career. If you are interested in studying for a master's or PhD in Hong Kong, and if you do finish studying and you're interested in living and working in Hong Kong, this is the right channel for you. So in today's video, I am going to talk about the pros and cons of living in Hong Kong. Quick disclaimer, this is from my own personal experiences. This is from the perspective of a Black African woman living in Hong Kong. So I want to say that if you're not Black and African, your experiences in Hong Kong might be completely different from mine. How did I even end up in Hong Kong before I tell you all these pros and cons? I came to Hong Kong in 2016, and if you watched my first video, I'll put the link in the description box. I knew only one person in Hong Kong before I came, and they told me about the Hong Kong PhD fellowship. I applied and I got it, which is a government initiative that is sponsoring PhD students to live and study in Hong Kong. So I came with that in 2016. I completed my PhD in 2019. If you followed what was happening in the world around that time, you would know that 2019, there were protests in Hong Kong. So there was a lot of unrest in Hong Kong at that time. And then COVID hit at the end of 2019. So I was forced to leave Hong Kong briefly. So I lived in Hong Kong between 2016 to 2019. And I took up a postdoc in Johannesburg, South Africa. And then obviously the world closed down. It was COVID. And then I came back to Hong Kong as it was just opening up again after COVID. And Hong Kong took quite a while to open up. Post-COVID, things didn't really return to normal in Hong Kong. But yeah, at least the borders were no longer closed and people were traveling in and out quite freely again. And people were returning back to the office. Companies were opening up again. Restaurants were opening up again. So I've been in Hong Kong for a little over 4 years now. Yeah, a little over 4 years. Let's start with the good stuff because we don't want to be negative in this channel. So I'm going to start with the pros of living in Hong Kong. There are many, right? So I've got my little notebook here where I've written down. I'll be looking down here and there to my list of pros and cons so that I don't forget anything. But point number one, pro number one, is the fact that Hong Kong has probably one of the best and most reliable public transport systems. And I think I've spoken about this in my previous videos. Hong Kong transport system is fast, it's efficient, it's reliable. I think the longest time I've ever waited for public transport is literally like 10 minutes. That's the longest I've ever had to wait for public transport in Hong Kong. I usually mostly use the metro rail, which is the train. I'm not a fan of the buses, but they do have a very good bus system, minibus system, also taxis, Ubers, but I prefer to use the metro rail. So for me, it works very efficiently because I live just one railway stop from my work. So I travel literally like 30 minutes to go to work from leaving my house, including a 10-minute walk, then maybe 10 minutes on the train and I'm getting off. I walk another 10 minutes and I'm at work. So that's pretty good commuting time for me. So my first advantage of living in Hong Kong, the first pro of living in Hong Kong, is the fast, reliable, efficient public transport system. Of course, every public transport system has its flaws. And I think with the Hong Kong one, it's probably at peak times, it's going to be crowded. So at times you won't get a seat and you have to stand and probably be rubbing against a lot of strangers, but it's not so bad. So definitely fast, efficient public transport system, which is very reliable. Pro number two, I'm going to be very fast with these points because I don't want this to be too long and I do tend to ramble on and on. Another advantage or a pro of living in Hong Kong is the clean streets, clean public spaces, clean bathrooms. 10 out of 10. Hong Kong is a clean city, and how there is a penalty for littering or just fouling the streets. If you have a dog, you have to be picking up after your pet. So it is a very clean city. You're not going to find rubbish heaps on the street corner, nothing like that. They collect rubbish regularly. If you're coming from an African country, you know why I'm saying this is a pro. You know why I'm saying this is so nice just to walk in a clean street. I know Japan is the cleanest country, I think, in Asia, but Hong Kong is a close second. Pro number three, Hong Kong has comparably, they have a high quality education system. And again, from the perspective of a Black African woman, education systems have kind of gone down in my continent. So it is a plus to experience high quality education, international professors that are world renowned, that are coming from other top universities in the world. They also working here in Hong Kong, world-class researchers in the university system. I'm talking from my own perspective as an academic. Hong Kong is actually one of the places that has a couple of universities that are in the world ranking, right? Pro number four of living in Hong Kong is travel around Asia is made easy if you live in Hong Kong. And I've made it a mission of mine to actually travel to more places in Asia while I'm living here. In December, me and my daughter went to the Philippines, which was an amazing time. The flight was just a little under 1 hour, 30 minutes. We were already in the Philippines. So it's very easy to travel within Asia, particularly Southeast Asian countries, if you want to visit Bali, Indonesia, if you want to visit Thailand, if you want to visit Malaysia. A lot of people that live in Hong Kong have taken advantage of that to actually travel around Asia. And if you know, a lot of people that even travel from outside Hong Kong, they pass through Hong Kong to go to these places. So if you're living in Hong Kong, it makes traveling around Asia much easier. And I'm not saying that it's cheap, because it might be expensive to travel and stay in these places, but comparatively, if you're living in Hong Kong, it will be cheap for you to travel around Southeast Asia, because the Hong Kong dollar, particularly if you're going to the Philippines, if you're going to Bali, Indonesia, it will be so much cheaper for you. And I remember in 2019, I went to Malaysia, I went to Kuala Lumpur, and I enjoyed it. Kuala Lumpur, Penang, and we ended up in Langkawi. And so it was so beautiful. And I got to do that because I was living in Hong Kong. Pro number five, why I would recommend Hong Kong, and also why Hong Kong is one of the good places to live. It's very safe, very low crime rates. You can literally walk in Hong Kong, middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. The streets will be lit as if it's during the day. It is a safe place. If you forget your phone in a cab, they will contact you, they will find you and give you your phone back. If you leave your phone in a mall, in a bathroom, anywhere, right? So it's not one of those places where you're scared and walking around clutching your handbag. That does not happen here. Petty theft, these small crimes, I have not experienced in Hong Kong. I feel quite safe to walk around. If you go out and you come back late, you're pretty much safe. Pro number six, healthy food options. If you are into eating healthy, the way Hong Kong food is prepared, or in general Chinese food is prepared, very healthy. They boil more than they fry. So a lot of food is prepared in very healthy ways, and they eat a lot of vegetables and fruits, a lot of soups. They don't drink. Hong Kong people, and I think again it's a Chinese thing, cold water is viewed to be very unhealthy. So a lot of restaurants, a lot of places where you can eat, they do not serve cold water. Warm water is served. Rate of food options to choose from. If you are a foodie, you will definitely enjoy staying in Hong Kong. I'm not very much a foodie, but I still enjoy the wide variety of options, because if you're not into Chinese food, there's a lot of Western options. And Hong Kong is one of the places where you can also get a taste of Asia. Literally, you can literally taste food from all the other Southeast Asian places. Thai food, you can get Indonesian food. So literally a variety of options. Eating out is going to be expensive like in most places, but you still, even when you're eating out, you still find cheaper options. There's something for everyone. I think if you want the high end 5-star Michelin star restaurants, you'll find those. But if you're just looking for cheaper options, including street food, you'll still get very nice food in Hong Kong. Typical Chinese menu, if that's your thing, you'll still find options. If you want your McDonald's, it's there. Starbucks is there. Order, if I want to order in, very fast options of doing that as well. Everything is automated. You can do it online. There's so many platforms. You never have to struggle if you want to eat in, if you want to dine out. All of that is efficient. Okay, I think this is my last pro that I want to share. Again, comparatively competitive salaries. And I'm saying this as someone who has been working in Hong Kong for some time now. I think the salaries by comparison in Hong Kong are much higher as compared to other places, particularly if I'm comparing with the salary I was getting back home before I came here. Hong Kong has relatively higher salaries. And I hope my people from home are not watching this. I'm not rich by any measure, but because also then the standard of living is high, rent is expensive, and I'm going to share that when I'm sharing the cons. So even if you're earning higher, you might be spending higher. But one thing I want to mention is that there's very low tax in Hong Kong. So you're not taxed too much for the amount that you're earning compared to people living in Canada or the US. You get so much from your salary because it's not too taxed. It's not, there's no high tax in Hong Kong. It's not like Dubai where it's zero tax, but at least the tax is very low in Hong Kong. So you don't feel like your whole salary is going to tax. But then huge amounts of money in Hong Kong, particularly those in finance, they earn huge salaries and they can afford to pay 20,000 Hong Kong dollars rent, which is, I will calculate the equivalent in US dollars, that they pay every month. So competitive salaries, depending on the field that you're in, there's still people that are paid really low in Hong Kong, depending on the industry that you're in. Let me take a quick drink before I move on to the cons. Whew. So buckle up because this one is going to be tough. So what are the negatives or the cons of living in Hong Kong? Again, my disclaimer, this is coming from my personal perspective. So if you're not Black and African and a woman, you might not have experienced some of the things I'm going to share. But if you can relate, please do share down below in the comment section and tell me what has been your experience. So let me begin with a sore point of mine, something that has affected me and a lot of my friends. I think Hong Kong is not the place for you if you're single. Do not come to Hong Kong and hope that you will meet your life partner here. Granted, someone might have had a better experience of that than me. I came to Hong Kong as a single woman. Now I'm a mother of one, yes, but I came as a single woman and dating was not the easiest thing because, and I'm going to say it blankly from my own experience, a Black African woman is the last option for dating. If you're on the dating sites, even meeting people, you are the last option. You're the last person anyone wants to date. Not because you're ugly or anything, but Hong Kong has this thing, and I'm going to say it as I see it or as I have observed it. I am attracted to Black African men. One who meets you is going to assume, first of all, that you are a working woman. And it is an assumption that is unfair. And nothing against sex work, it is work and I respect it. But then everyone else kind of views every Black woman as a sex worker, which is ignorance on their part, but also now the energy to try and explain to people that you're actually a student or you're an academic. It is too much work to even explain that you are not a sex worker. It's a lot of work. So imagine having to prove yourself to people that have already put you in a box. Nothing, again, I want to repeat, nothing against sex workers. I respect the craft. I respect it. I do not judge it. But in the context of Asia, I've heard similar stories in Malaysia. I've heard similar stories even in Indonesia. Women, Black women are struggling to find partners because everyone just assumes that you are here, you're probably, looking for ways to make money in that way. We're being stereotyped in that sense, right? So that makes dating very complicated, and you constantly have to be explaining that I don't fit in that box. Who has time for that? No one. So sadly as well, you find those types that just have jungle fever, that just have this excitement that they're meeting a black person for the first time. They're not really wanting to date you seriously, but they're just trying to experience what it's like to be with a black woman. Sad, but it happens. So it doesn't bode well for relationships, right? And I want to speak also not just on romantic relationships, just basic social life here. It's a very busy lifestyle. It's a very competitive society. So people are usually working a lot. So no one even has time to meet anyone. So people usually meet through dating sites. So if you're not into that, you're probably going to spend a whole lot of time by yourself. You're not going to meet anyone. And I think I shared in a previous video how it's a very closed society. So if you don't speak the language, you're not going to be interacting that much with others. Granted, there are so many international groups that you can join if you're interested in meeting people, but then again, you're going to get those problems that I shared earlier where people are assuming that you're either selling or, you're looking for something. It's very tough, but it's also a very transient society where people are only here for a short period and then they're going back to their countries. I don't know why it's set up that way. A lot of people don't really stay here long term, right? A lot of people use Hong Kong as a stepping stone to somewhere else, or they just here briefly for a year or two and then they move on. And that makes it very difficult to have serious relationships. So a lot of people do say that come here with your family, yes, you will be fine. But if you're single, maybe think twice about how you're going to navigate that. If you're in a long distance relationship, are you going to try and maintain that? Also bearing in mind maybe the distance that you have to travel to see each other and the toll that might take. Second point, second con to living in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is diverse. It is known for being a diversity, but it's not inclusive. Hong Kong is diverse but not inclusive. You are going to find it very difficult to actually integrate into this society. So if you're someone who is looking for integration, if you're someone who is looking to fit in with the locals, you might find that difficult, particularly if you don't speak the language. So it might be diverse. And I think, as I shared in my previous video, it's very difficult to find people that will take you in. It's a very closed society. And there are pockets where it's very diverse and you'll be seeing a lot of other international people. But if you go to the outskirts, like where I live, you're probably one of five black people in that area. And chances are you're going to be very isolated. And that's the one thing I don't like about this place, because then once you're feeling isolated, it comes with a lot of other issues where you feel discriminated against or you kind of feel shunned by society, right? So it's not the most inclusive society. You might find it very difficult to adjust, particularly if you're a person that thrives in community. I'm an introvert, so I don't mind being in my house with just me and my child. But if you're a person that thrives in society and community, it might really hit you very hard that it's not a very inclusive society. Anyone else might have a different experience. But from my own experience of not speaking the language, of not really feeling like I belong, that is what I will say. It's very difficult to feel like you belong. I've heard people that have lived in Hong Kong for years, 15, 20 years. There are people who have been born here, but by virtue of being black or ethnic minority, they never feel like they truly belong in this place, even though it's their home. I don't have much to say on that because I don't want to hammer in, because someone might come and say, well, go back to your country. Why are you even here? But we live in a global world. Like, there should be room for us to coexist, particularly, with ethnic minorities that have been born. You have lived in Hong Kong all your life and you still feel like an outsider. I don't think that's very nice, but it's something that will take years, a lot of mindset shifts that need to happen, a lot of policy shifts that need to happen. Anything ethnic minority here in Hong Kong, from my own observations and through my work, it's still very much on the outside. It's still very much not fully integrated. And I do hope we see a day when that changes. Con number three, one thing I don't like about Hong Kong is that accommodation is very expensive. And I started mentioning that earlier. Accommodation is very expensive and for very small spaces, right? Hong Kong has small apartments by world standards, very small apartments, and they're very expensive. I always say to people, I cannot justify living in this small space and be paying this much. It's very common to be paying something like over 1,500 USD a month rent for a cupboard. It's very difficult to justify that. I live in a two-bedroom apartment. I'm very fortunate. But then, like I said, I live in the outskirts. I'm far away from the action or, where the diversity is. I had to make that choice. Like, if I want space, I have to move out of the city. So I don't stay in the city, but I can easily travel to the city like 45 minutes to an hour. You can easily reach any place in Hong Kong within an hour. That's another pro I forgot to mention. You can reach any place within an hour, including the outlying islands in Hong Kong. So that's a plus. But for me, I had to stay in the outskirts because I cannot do the small cupboards. I like my space. I'm used to living in a big house, even back in my country. So even now, having a two-bedroomed apartment, even though it's just me and my daughter, I prefer that. I really prefer, I like my space. But even then, it's still small by the standards that I'm used to, especially for the amount I'm paying for. If I think about the rent that I'm paying back home, I will be living in a 3-4 bedroomed house, right? But here it can only get me a two-bedroomed apartment. This one is quite emotional for me because I recently went through that. Pro number five is you will have a tough time accessing public services if you do not speak the language, if you don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin. And I say it's emotional for me because my daughter fell sick a couple of weeks ago. My daughter is 22 months old now. So I've got a toddler in the house. She fell sick, and because she just had high fever, I took her to the hospital, a public hospital nearby, and we were turned away because no one wanted to speak to me. I could not find anyone to explain, the symptoms that my child was having, and we were turned away. And someone actually advised me later on I should have just called the ambulance. If you arrive there in an ambulance, you will get seen. But it was so hurtful to me that I had to be turned away first to be told that. What if my child was in a critical situation? So the language issue, as much as they say it's a trilingual state, and in most public services, no one is trying to speak English. They have an attitude when you speak to them in English. It is their country. I get that. I totally understand that. But I think a little bit of humanity goes a long way. You don't turn people away because they're not speaking your language, but there's a tendency to shun anyone that is speaking in a different language. And again, that's my own personal experience. I'm brown, right? So there is a kind of Caucasian white worship that happens here in Hong Kong. They will try their best to speak English if they're speaking to a Western person, a Caucasian person. But if it's a brown person, it is what it is. But I think that's one of the biggest cons for me, that if you're brown, if you're not white in this place, one is going to be really welcoming. Across the board, I think there is quite a bit of discrimination there. Or it's just ignorance. I don't know what it is, but it does tend to affect how you access public services. Missing home but not being able to fly back as often, that's another disadvantage of living here. It's not very easy to go there regularly because then it's expensive, but you tend to miss a lot of things with family. My mom is getting older. I wish I could be close by, but then again, you have to weigh your options. Like, I can't always be there. I have to work, I have to make this money. And so you take the good with the bad, right? You might feel isolated, you might feel like there's no one on your side, but then, yeah, there is that thing of like, whew, I miss family, I feel alone, and there's very little to no social life. As much as there are these communities, from different countries where you can meet people from your country, if you're not into large group gatherings, you're still not going to enjoy those if you're an introvert or anything like that, and you just want to be with your family. So that can be quite tough, especially if you live here for a long period and you're not able to go home. Ideally, buying tickets on time, like maybe 3-4 months in advance, it works out cheaper that way, so that you can at least try to be home once a year. I think once a year. Twice a year is a stretch, but at least once a year. At least once a year. Okay, last disadvantage of living in Hong Kong is it's very much a classist society. And again, this might get me in trouble. Hong Kong is a classist society. They care too much about what you're wearing, what you're driving, what phone you have. Almost everyone here, they get the latest iPhone. They're trying to get the latest brands of shoes, clothes, everything. So it's one of those, like, if you're not into that, if you're not into the capitalist chain, it's going to get to you, because it's very superficial in a way. And there's a certain way you're treated if you're not dressed according to the so-called standard. So I think I get the sense that there's a lot of keeping up appearances in Hong Kong, and you're kind of forced to keep up with the trends. Everyone is trying to be trendy. Everyone is trying to wear the latest brands, get the latest phone. And if that's not your lifestyle, you kind of feel a bit cramped out, like you kind of feel like you don't really fit in. Very classist societies where anything that is not posh, or anything that is considered poor or vulnerable, is kind of frowned upon. No one wants to associate with poverty here, I believe. And that's why I teach sociology, so I know, like, the gap between the rich and the poor is widening in China and Hong Kong. So there's a lot of flaunting of wealth, and it's so obvious that in one corner there's someone who is homeless, and in the same street someone is driving a Bentley or a Rolls Royce. And it's like, how are we distributing wealth here? But what can I say? I come from an African country where we have bigger problems, so I'm just observing society here. I'm not calling out anyone, I'm just saying it's a very classist society. Anyway, I'm going to end the video here. Those were my pros and cons of living in Hong Kong. Would I still recommend Hong Kong as a study destination? Definitely yes. I feel like as a student, you will still enjoy your student life. If you're not looking for too much, you're there for your books, you will still enjoy life in Hong Kong. So do think about it. You can watch this video just to get a realistic sense from someone that has lived here, but you're still free to make up your own mind at the end of the day. So don't take everything I said, take it with a pinch of salt. And if you want to experience it for yourself, come through. But one day, if you're here in Hong Kong, do remember that I did give you some advice from the perspective of a Black African woman, and this was my experience. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next video.